And then you'd leave this room and you'd go out here to the courtyard that goes around the building, and even down here. The courtyard has countersunk pools that are in cooler degrees. There's at least 3 stages. There's a hot room, which is called the caldarium, and then there's a tepidarium, or tepidaria, there's quite a few of them, lukewarm, tepid, and then elsewhere around the fringes there are some countersunk pools that are called frigidaria. And you would go to the cool pools, and then you'd come to the hot pool, and you go back and forth, and it's very relaxing, very therapeutic. And I mean, the Scandinavians have nothing on the Romans. I mean, the Romans are 2,000 years ahead, if you will, of opening and closing pores for health reasons. Hot and cold baths, you know, and they're talking business and relaxing. But there's always the options for homosexuality and prostitution with women. I mean, there's always that option, whatever your preference is. And homosexuality was not frowned upon at all. It was not considered wrong at all by Romans. In fact, that was a big popular thing, as a matter of fact. So it's a pretty, it's a sinful sort of place for a Christian. So right next door, in the Christian period, there's a church built. And I always, you know, this always gets me. You know, how do you know that they're trying to keep the water warm as long as possible? So this is a lukewarm pool. But around the outside of the courtyard are a lot of little rooms, and some of them have other pools that would be cooler. And there's massage rooms and all kinds of rooms. Now, where Matt is standing is a pretty good view. If you look, it's right at the beginning underneath this arched tent. The floor, the mosaic tile floor right there, you all need to be experts on this anyway, so you might as well take a look at the floor, and you'll notice that there are little plus designs. Black and white stones making little pluses. Those are Byzantine pluses. So this is the Byzantine period. That means Byzantine Christians are still using the bath outfits like Romans and everybody else. Going on here during Christian period. So keep in mind that it's a pretty smooth transition from Greek, Roman into Byzantine Christian. There's not much difference except they're called Christian. Okay, but they still have their gladiatorial arena going, and blood sports and bathhouses. And this would be a pretty vile place to come and visit. Evil!
Did you say what the hot one's called again?
Caldarium. You've heard of
like
a cauldron?
And this is like Cupid.
Yeah. And then frigid.
Is that right? Tepidarium?
Yeah.
What's the next one called?
Frigidarium. Main Street during the Roman period. And the Romans had a technique. Whenever they came to town, they made sure there were certain things that were just like home. So Romans prefer to have one market street that goes through town that goes north and south. Well, that's what this street does. And then they would call that main street Cardo, which is from Cardia. It's really the heart of town, and we would call this High Street or the main drag, or, you know, there's a lot of different ways to refer to the strip. This is the strip right here. This leads to the mall. You know, this is the main shopping avenue. And what you need to use your imaginations on is the second half of the street, the whole right side. They're excavating underneath. So they only restored the left side for you. I just want to give you an impression. There's a big street, colonnaded walkways on both sides, sidewalks. And if you look over here, behind me, I don't know what's left or right today. There's a sidewalk and little shopways, little shop entrances. So you walk down this sidewalk and you'd have little shops. And we know what was going on in a lot of these little shops. You've got shops that would sell leather products. We know where the glass shops were located, mosaic tile shops. We think we've got some guy's shop here that was a mosaic tile repairman. But some of the tools and the various tiles that were found in the shop don't all match. So we figure this guy builds them or repairs them or whatever. And excuse me?
Sorry. The top of a column.
Yeah, that's right. Again, this mentality just amuses us. When there's an earthquake and things fall over, it's too much trouble to move it out of the way. They just leave it where it is or situate it and then build up with the next level and go on with life.
Wow.
So you've got a few
Column
people in
toss.
history that didn't do this. Egyptians, there's a few Egyptian kings that said, no, we're going down to bedrock. Herod the Great, for example, probably Solomon. A few people like that would say, no, we're going down to bedrock, make it sure, make it sturdy. But everybody else is doing it the cheap construction way, and just get. That's right, breaking all. OSHA has no control here.
This is a sidewalk, Byzantine Christian sidewalk. Look here where a column had probably fallen in and crushed it.
This is added, say, about 2nd, maybe 3rd century in there. And this would be the latest fashion. Yeah, I don't know what you compare it to, but the mall has arrived to Scythopolis, or McDonald's has arrived to Scythopolis. Anything that you could think of like that. It's a newfangled attraction. You probably know it if you read all the way through Paul's letters. He talks about going to a place like this, the Agora. And the Agora of a Greek metropolis should have several things and qualities. There should be things at the Agora, like perhaps a library, a civic center, a temple to the primary deities or deity of the town. In this case, there's a temple right here behind me to the main god of Scythopolis. And this is the god of revelry. He's the god that can drink anybody under the table. Pardon? Actually, Bacchus is a deity of a town close by. I wonder if there was rivalry. This deity is Dionysius, and he is the one who drinks Hercules under the table in one of the stories. Hercules is going down, he can't handle any more, and this deity is laughing, and he's soaking down some more wine, and there's some interesting stories like that. Well, anyway, this is the god of the town. I mean, this is the god of revelry. This must be a party town. And that's a pretty popular deity, by the way. There's several in the Galilee, Greek towns that have this deity. And I have to look it up, but I think Bacchus is the deity of Sephori or Sepphoris. Under one of these columns right here, I don't know which column, but when they were excavating through here, they found the skeletal frame of a man. And he was absolutely crushed. I mean, flat as a pancake. But in his hand was a coin purse full of coins. So this guy, apparently during the earthquake, he ran out into the street, which is not a bad place to run if you can dodge columns. But I would say that being on the sidewalk is a worse place to be because the roof would collapse on you. And that's a pretty solid roof. Running out into the street is also problematic because all the columns get squeezed out towards the street when there's an earthquake. They've got heavy weights on them that pinch them out. You know, sort of they all fall towards the street. So it'd be pretty risky either way during an earthquake. Look at the size of this one capital. That's probably a 5-ton capital. We did in Caesarea. It's a little bigger here. But I want to pause at this point for just a moment to consider the street down below. This street, if you went right or west, it would take you to the Jezreel Valley. Or if you turn left and you go down the hill, it forks, and part of it goes up and over toward the gladiatorial arena. That's just a short distance over there. Or you can turn left and go right down to the Jordan Valley, and that street is also a market street all the way down for probably a mile. It's market.
This building is called the Facade. It has no function whatsoever
Okay, we're moving on.
other than to impress people as they come in from the city. So it's a solid building, no interior rooms. This is a building that could have been a local fish market. The local fish market. Notice, where is it? There it is. The little Poseidon logo in the brick. I've been made fun of for my monotone voice, so now I use game show voice. Thank you. This is a public bathroom. Each of these little pillar things sticking out of the wall, this is where the people would sit as they did their business, and in that trench in front is where water would run, where they would wash their hands. And if the wealthy would send their slaves down, or their servants down in the winter when it was cold stone, and have them sit on it and warm it up for them, and then they would come out and use the restroom. Isn't that nice?
What was that for?
Just a fountain, the lion head fountain. There's little lions. I got these from St. Augustine, off the bridge. Very ornate. Another amphitheater. I guess they're setting it up to do some type of show now. Really great place to have a show. Concert. Performances were presented in the daytime, as is the usual practice in the Roman world. The seats face north, so the spectators have their backs to the sun. Comedies and tragedies were rarely included in the repertoire. Like most of the inhabitants of the Roman Empire, the people of Beth Shean, which is here, preferred lighter entertainment, mainly pantomimes and imitations. Occasionally, athletic competitions and acrobatic acts were presented, and sometimes the theater simply served as a gathering place where citizens could air their views on social and political issues. Here's a picture of an artist's rendering of the reconstruction of the deal. I don't know if this is going to come out, but you see the major backdrop there, the Scaina, which is the stage and the building. Orchestra pit between the rows of seats in the stage. Seating areas where we're standing, and there's a passage.
Well, let's see. I don't know how you guess that. Even thought about passages. Yeah. It's a tough one. It was right abroad. Really where Achan was stoned. Remember Achan, who stole from Jericho against the ban in Joshua's time, and Achan was stoned, and then they call that valley the Valley of Troubles.
We're here in Qumran. This is the area where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. This is the Essene sect that lived out here that transcribed many of the Old Testament writings. Been a major find for New Testament scholars here in the last century. And this is the wilderness the Bible describes. Whenever it uses the word wilderness, they're talking of the desert. And there was a Hebrew belief that to hear God's word, many times in the Bible you see people would go and have a wilderness experience, from David, of course Jesus, to those that were really getting a word from God. Many times had to come out to the wilderness and God would speak to them, because they would have to rely on Him to survive out here. So this is Qumran. It's now an Arabic quarter. There's a picture of the caves the Qumran sect was in. Wow, there's a good view.
I can't breathe.
That's one of their favorite things.
You get elected.
Oh yeah.
You gotta be
Get that picture. Oh, we could have walked up here. Oh, look. We could have walked. What were we thinking? Oh, yeah, there are all the steps.
Masada. There's no fresh water for at least 10 miles. You have to go all the way back to Engedi before you find any adequate springs, and that's 10 miles as the crow flies. So Masada, first of all, is isolated from any fresh water. So you're going to have to secure water from rain runoff, which I got to tell you, it only rains a couple inches a year down here. Not very much. Most of that runs off. It doesn't even have time to soak in. So if you can capture all the runoff, you might be able to fill some cisterns, but I'd say a lot further down the hill. You've got cisterns up here on the mountain that are filled by hand. That is, they go down the hill a certain distance from cisterns below, and they bring water up by hand and fill up these cisterns top to mouth. And I hope that you all can see or have seen, there's a brown line in there that basically shows you how full the cistern was. It actually was full of water at one point. And there's a dozen other cisterns like it. And all these cisterns were filled at one point.
It's filled.
But filled by hand to that line.
Filled by hand.
Plowed any fields or had any serious crops. We may have had a couple trees, fruit trees, shade trees. Wouldn't rule that out. Up here on top, it probably still looks like a pretty ruined place to you. The archaeologists didn't reconstruct everything up here. They just did a few areas of importance. For example, they reconstructed a grain storage area we're going to see next. They reconstructed the bathhouse, the northern palace of Herod, the western palace, and the palace of his family, so 3 houses, if you will, and a swimming pool, and you'll see a few things that the Herodian family might have enjoyed up here. Altogether, it's about 22 acres on top, surrounded by cliffs on all sides, as you know, and then at the top of the cliffs, Herod doesn't feel safe enough with just cliffs, so he has a casemate wall system built all the way around with 36 towers. And in the wall, there's places for soldiers to live and housing and whatnot. But this tells you a little bit about the man. I mean, 200-foot cliffs aren't quite good enough.
Fair enough.
Something. Roger asked a good question. Did they have agriculture up here? I don't think so. Not in any serious fashion. Let's go. I'll
So
show
they brought
you.
their food up with them?
They brought all their food up, and I'm going to show you where they stored it.
And how long did they stay at a time?
Who?
Whoever.
I don't know. Zealots were here 7 years. So
And they
there
brought
was
all
a
that food up enough for 7 years?
Oh man, there was enough food for hundreds of years.
Oh my stars.
This is a dry place. You can store grain or dried fruit. It's going to last for centuries.
Like Arizona, huh?
Any left?
At least.
At least that.
Any left? Yes.
No.
Yes. I've actually held in my hand 7 grains that were over 3,000 years old.
Wow.
They weren't found at Masada. They were found in the pyramids of Egypt. But we planted them and they germinated.
Wow.
3,500-year-old seeds.
So we won't see any here. So.
They excavated some and they found a few grains here. Yeah. They're in a museum in Jerusalem. Roof logs, I assume. And in these chambers, there's 16 of these here. In the chambers, you'd have big ceramic jars and containers for wheat and barley, dried fruits, olive oil, wine, and actually, Josephus, several people talk about how much food there was up here, enough to last a long time. Herod thought he would live forever, just to give you a clue. Thought he would live forever, so he packed Masada with enough water and food to also last millennia, perhaps. So hundreds of people, even at one point 1,000 people lived up here for 7 years, never had to go anywhere for food. They had enough grain They can grind the wheat into flour and bake bread. There's a bakery up here, dried fruit, water. That's all you need. Carob, fruit. Investigate the site. But at Qumran, there's probably 24 of these ritual bathing pools, mikvah, and this is, you could say, one of the main sources where we get baptism developing out of. So a baptismal pool, if you can't remember mikvah, this is the source where it comes from. This one. The first room is a disrobing room, and the second rooms that you'll see will be tepidarium and frigidarium and so forth. And we'll end up, we can all fit together in the caldarium. It's big enough.
How do they have cold water?
You'll see color frescoes, like here, for example, in the plaster, there's coloring, and that's survived 2,000 years. Some of this has survived the elements, rain, sun, and yet the color is still nice and bright.
How'd they know the window was there?
Yeah.
They had the line, right?
Yeah.
How high it was, but how do they know it goes up that high? Or the windows there,
that I don't
there's
know.
a door there. How do they know that there
Good
wasn't a
question.
bell there?
Ask your youth pastor. Yeah. It's obviously not that easy.
No, she already had it open and everything.
Oh, you unzip it? Well, don't. Don't steal my money, you thieving person.
That was funny.
You don't even know I was messing with
That's your money?
It's my purse. It's my little boy's
Don't
purse.
drink it every 2 minutes. Support. You need more?
And a little bit under there.
Don't be tough, man.
They must have been shorter back then.
I was just saying,
They were real short when they took baths.
Dave, don't hit your head.
Oh gosh, they were real short. This is how they got rid of the tall
Oh
people.
yeah, I feel small here. This makes me feel good.
That's cool.
This is, isn't that wild? That's how they put the holes there. Boy, this is nice right here. Can we stay here for a while?
Hold on, David, stay right there. Hold on. Picture of Ducky in the hallway.
I'm stuck. I can't get out. There. Is this original floor here, or did they rebuild that?
Everything's original on the black liner except for the clay piece. This one.
That's what I was wondering.
Tier or level of a triple-tiered palace. There's 2 levels of Herod's palace that go down the side of the cliff here. And this is his private villa. The man, the tyrant of Judea. This was maybe his retirement scheme that he had in mind to spend out his days here. But you know what? Somebody's already mentioned, we don't know that Herod ever really spent any time at Masada. He has it all built up with all the comforts of home, but we don't think he ever really came down here and enjoyed it. I can tell you that Herod didn't live to see Masada completed. It was a 22-year project to build it. He died before it was finished. So, you know, you can make a pretty good argument for Herod never really coming up here and enjoying it. He sent his family a couple of times, according to Josephus, but that's about as much as we know. Anyway, had he come up here, he could have enjoyed his own private villa with his own view towards En-Gedi and his own private sauna, his bathhouse. There's a bathhouse on the 3rd tier down. It's small, but it's a bathhouse. So yeah, he's got it all. I brought a youth group up here once, 11, 12-year-olds from my congregation and from elsewhere. About 20 kids up here. And there was a little boy. He's graduated high school now, but his father is Japanese, his mother's Australian and Israeli, kind of in a unique combination. And I asked this group, I said, what would you compare Masada to in our times? Is there anything you could compare? And he went, yeah, it's like a video arcade on the moon. And it really took me back, and I've thought, that's so accurate. This is so far-fetched to have a comfortable palace in the middle of nothing, in the middle of the desert, parched, desolate, off the beaten path, cliff face, to have a nice palace down here with swimming pools and trampolines and all that stuff. Unthinkable. When you get brave enough and you want to come over and look off the edge, there's a row of stones down below us, a string of unhewn rocks, and some square and rectangular looking configurations. There's a sort of a diamond shape down there and a big rectangle of stones over here. And that string of rocks goes right around Masada. You don't get to look down on ravens every day. Pretty cool.
What rocks?
So this is the
See the
Roman
line?
encampment.
Line.
I hope
And what is it?
I haven't
He's
confused
telling us
you,
now.
but when after Herod dies, a few Romans are stationed at Masada, and then the Zealots take it from them, and then the Romans take it back. So when the Romans were taking it back from the Zealots, they set up a siege line around the mountain, and they set up 8 big military camps. And they brought the 10th Legion down here under the direction of a general named Silva. General Silva of the 10th Legion, he was camped right over there on top of those cliffs. And apparently they could hurl insults at one another. You can yell back and forth across the canyon when the wind's not blowing and, you know, yell out stuff about your mother and your mama wears army boots. Your mother wears army boots. And the modern response is, yeah, so what?
Oops. Welcome to church.
But wasn't a bad.
This guy said how he didn't know that much scripture like he wanted to.
Who? Yoni?
But he knows
He's got the Bible memorized. What are you kidding me? Compared to him, all I know is John 3:16.
I don't even know that.
There it is.
I got one
Ibex.
that's 10 times.
Said, yeah, this was the earlier model. This is about 5.5 years old. About 5 years
Are you
old.
up on prices of handycams, especially high 8s quality?
Kim just bought, didn't you guys just?
Ibex, some of you have already noticed down at the bottom of this ramp. And then at the very base of the ramp there's a cone-shaped, kind of brownish, milky, chocolatey colored little cone down there where a bunch of zealots were buried. And it looks like zealots, you know, you can't bury your dead inside the city walls, so they were burying down here. And after the excavation on top, they found a few more zealot.
These are Roman cannonballs for the catapults. They're about 200 pounds each. Left here, Roman style.
Yeah.
Zealots took the floor and made their own mikvah pool. Today, one of them is Herodian style artwork, relief work, and murals that you'll see on floors, tile floors. This is part of the palace that Herod constructed to perhaps do administrative kind of work. The Zealots used this palace also to make probably the decision-making center for the Zealots. But again, they don't really care about Herodian mosaic floors. They don't care about the artwork. And so the Zealots add a few intrusions of their own. They dig out some of the floors. They add pools. Here's a mikvah pool down there. They just completely rip the floor out and put their own pool in. I haven't said too much about mikvah. I think I'll do a little bit here while we're in the shade, and then a little more tomorrow. Briefly point out a swimming pool. This is one of the few swimming pools in the ancient world. It's not really what you would think as a deep pool. It probably was very shallow. I'm sure they didn't fill it full of water. And swimming is not a leisure back in those days. Very few people knew how to swim. In fact, when Herod the Great built his port at Caesarea, he had to build some foundations that were in the water. He had to hire divers from Rome.
I got it! Look at that farmer stand he's got.
Like a turtle.
Oh man!
Gotta stand up.
We think other side from Hey, take my towel and wipe off your feet and all that.
Yeah, it's a reason to be thankful also. We're coming up the back of the Mount of Olives. As you can see from the east side, we're coming through East Jerusalem, part of East Jerusalem here. East Jerusalem has been an area of the city that has had some turbulent and disturbed times. It's primarily Muslim Arab here. And they've not always wanted to be part of sovereign Israel or part of Jewish Jerusalem.
This is a hotel the president stays in when he comes over. King David Hotel, right across the street from it. The old city of Jerusalem, the wall built during the Crusaders era. There's a good view of Jerusalem at night. It's pretty. Temperature is nice.
If you say King David Hotel, someone is going to recognize that and get you started on your way. We're not that far, but just so you know, it's a straight walk pretty much from Jaffa up to the King David Hotel. Okay, let's go this way.
There's Gloria. Mount of Olives. That is the Mount of Olives. This is Cardo, an ancient marketplace. You see the Greek or Roman influence at least. The movie stars. Here we got a view of the Dome of the Rock and the Wailing Wall.
Is that the Wailing Wall right now?
Is that what?
Is that the Wailing Wall?
That's the Wailing Wall. That's the Dome of the Rock that you see above it. That's the Muslim shrine.
Yeah.
And that's the location of the temple when it was the temple was there. That's all.
Where the Holy of Holies and everything was?
That was the temple.
Are you serious?
And that's why that's where the temple is going to be rebuilt, so the Dome of the Rock has to come down. That's when the pastor talks about that. There it is. That's why it's going to be a little difficult to get that down.
And look, is that scaffolding around it though?
No, I don't think so. I think that's
This
part
is
of
just the men's side, on the other side of the bridge.
Yeah, men's side here, women over there.
And it's lots of
What is the significance of the Wailing Wall?
The Wailing Wall. This is the part of the temple, the Wailing Wall where the men pray. The last wall of the original temple from Herod's time.
They got the barrier thing.
Cover up there was called hidden on Shabbat.
Sorry, maybe that one didn't mean to read that loud.
the homes?
historically. But it does go back to Herodian period. The foundation stones of some of these towers are from Herod the Great's time. And then in this direction toward the police station right up there, everything under the street and around that area is all a big palace that Herod the Great lived in. And Christ Church is over here on the left. Underneath Christ Church, when they were doing some building projects and expanding, they found Herodian foundations and Byzantine. So we know that Herod's palace, we're told about the palace that Herod built at Jaffa Gates, and it had 3 towers. So we still have foundations of these towers. And just to let the cat out of the bag, when Pontius Pilate comes up to Jerusalem for the feasts, this Roman procurator comes to Jerusalem to kind of keep control during Jewish feasts. This is where he stays. This is the big palace that Herod built. After Herod died, this became Roman property. So Pontius Pilate probably stayed here, and part of the 10th Legion was stationed here at Jaffa Gate. So keep this in mind. I think it'll play a key role later on when we study some maps about how Jerusalem was a couple thousand years ago. We're also standing at the top of the main market street down from Jaffa Gate. It's called David Street, or the Street of the Chain. You'll probably come up that way tomorrow about lunchtime, and I'll guess that you might be having lunch in this area. Right? There's pizza. There's a really good falafel called the City Falafel. It's about 10 shekels. And there's a little bookstore over here called Emmanuel Bookstore. They have trinkets, gifts, and it's very reasonably priced at Emmanuel. Plus it's Christian, right? It's a believing bookstore. A believing bookstore. Thank you.
No, let's just stay right here.
Tour guide.
Have to break one of our legs and carry us on your shoulders for a while and talk to us. Is that true?
It'd be a lot of fun. I have seen Bedouin carrying around a small, I don't know if the leg was broken, but I've seen him carry one around. Get used to it, get used to the smell, the lamb nose, the voice. It's just like a pet. They become like a pet. Stu's up here. Did you ever hear of the 1.5 million Armenians that were slaughtered in 1915 by the Turks? Some people know about it, some people don't. It's a shame that more people don't know about it. It was indiscriminate. It was without cause, really. It was just purging the land to make more room, pillaging, and Armenians were the weaker community under the Turks, and 1.5 million in just a few months were killed. So this is the Armenian quarter. It's about 26 acres of land here, and I don't know exactly how many Armenians there are anymore. There's a few hundred that live here. There's also a couple of Jewish families that live in the Armenian quarter, and there's a few Armenians that live in the Jewish quarter, which starts right here. So the two communities get along pretty well. And I wonder if their warm relationship is not because they both suffered this century. Jews have lost 6 million this century to a genocide. Armenians 1.5 million to a genocide. I wonder if there's some identity there, identifying with suffering. So let me just say in general, these two groups get along very well. Armenians and Jews get along better than any other two groups in the Old City. The Christian quarter, it's called the Christian quarter, but it's I don't want to make this politically entangled, but it's the Christian Arab quarter, and some of these folks are Christian because their parents were Christians. It's a generational thing. It's sort of a name only for a lot of people. Sometimes when push comes to shove, blood is sometimes thicker than the faith. Thicker than water, the expression goes. That's unfortunate, but that's just the way it is right now. If you recall the Gulf War, and I know some of you had real close contact to the Gulf War crisis, well, living here during that time, it was really strange to see the relationships change. The Christian and Muslim quarters of the old city and most of East Jerusalem identified with Jordan because they used to be under Jordanian rule, right? So they identified strongly with Jordan, who was aligned with Iraq at that time. And Scud missiles were coming over. We had 39 Scud missiles come over and land in the coastal plain, Tel Aviv, Haifa, one down in the Negev. I'll tell you that story later on. But 39 Scuds came over, and me and my brother-in-law used to go, he looks like Matt, my brother-in-law, looks just like Matt. I told my brother-in-law last night, I said, I've had the urge several times just to go up, wrestle him, kick him, you know, because that's what I do to my brother-in-law. And I don't know if Matt would take it the same way. Do you? So last night, just for fun, I hit my brother-in-law. I said, I really wanted to do that for a couple of days. I had a nice juicy bruise there because he got me back when I was looking a couple weeks ago. He nailed me. So I owed him one. Anyway, my brother and I went up on the roof during the Gulf War almost every night. We caught on that it was all conventional warheads. It wasn't chemical or biological. So we went up on the roof with a video camera, and we were kind of shaky most of the time, but we got a few Scuds on tape as they were coming down onto Tel Aviv. They'd go out of the Earth's atmosphere and they'd come straight down, pretty much vertical onto target, and the Patriot missiles would come up and hit, but the things were still coming down and blowing up. That was the problem. Patriots all intercepted, but they only tore up the fuselage. They didn't do anything to the warheads. All 39 warheads fell to the ground and blew up and damaged some 700 homes, but nobody died. It was really miraculous. Anyway, we videotaped a lot of that, but in the background, guess what we could hear from our rooftop? We could hear all of East Jerusalem on their rooftops cheering, whistling, shouting, clapping. Every time a Scud would fall, there was this huge noise of voices and cheers. And that really made an impression. You knew who your friends were suddenly. Now, Jordan made peace with Israel. So suddenly, Christian and Muslim quarters, Arab quarters, were without a mother country. Their mother country made peace with Israel. What does that mean for them? You know, that suddenly made a dilemma for them. So things maybe are a little friendlier, maybe, in general. There have been a few incidents this year, so I don't know. Okay,
Now, why is there an Armenian quarter in Jerusalem?
Thank you. And Yoni, when will we be in Jerusalem? You know, once I had a question like that. Second day of touring in Jerusalem with a tour group, we were sitting at this archaeological site, and this lady said, Yoni, that's really interesting, but when are we going to be in Jerusalem? I've missed it, right? So, why is there an Armenian quarter? Well, the Armenian Christians, some of the earliest of the Eastern churches, Armenia, have had land holdings here since 3rd century. And in fact, if you want to know the truth, the Armenians have been the longest running group of people living here, pretty much unbroken. They've maintained property houses in their little corner of town. The Crusaders, when they came, they divided up the old city into quarters. And they're not even quarters, they're just little sections, almost ghettos. So the Armenians had their little section. Eventually the Jews had their little section, and Muslims had theirs, and a few Christian, other types of Christians had their section. So,
Go ahead.
I'm done.
Now, when you say Christian, what do you refer to?
There's Greek Orthodox, there's Syriac, there's Coptic. Now there's a few Ethiopians. I'm talking about the Orthodox groups of Christians. Greek Catholics. Who have I not said? there's at least 6 major groups that are represented in the Christian quarter.
They were allied with the Muslims.
Unfortunately, during so much of the Muslim periods, the Christians were subdued to a point, you might as well get along, you might as well make friends, you might as well, because it's survival. So inevitably there's a little bit of intermarriage, there's, as I said, if you're from Arab stock, sometimes you would rally together to fight and push another enemy out. Like when the Crusaders came in, all of the locals joined together to help kick the Crusaders out. Crusaders didn't differentiate between Muslims and non-Muslims. When the Crusaders came to town, they came to kill Muslims, right? To the infidels, but they couldn't tell the difference between Muslims and Christians and Jews. They just killed everybody. In fact, there's a Jewish synagogue here. Crusaders rounded up all the Jews into their synagogue and set it alight and sang a hymn. And the whole thing about hip hip hooray is part of this.
Destroying the infidels.
Yeah, that's right. So the Jews, they didn't like Crusaders. Armenians didn't like them. Christians didn't like them. So everybody joins forces to kick the Crusaders out. So that's what I mean. How do ties get started? That may And you've got a sidewalk here that had a covering. You can see some of the columns there. Covered sidewalk. And then half of the street. And this is a bigger corridor than the one you saw or walked on yesterday. It's wider. It's bigger. Now what I'm going to tell you, I got two things to talk about here. One of them I'll do in the shade. First, I just want to deal with an arch. You've got a couple of arches here. One is in situ. The other is new. It's restored. Take a look at the stones of the arch. Notice how several of them have wedge shapes. They're not just square blocks. You with me? Looks like it's going to be one of those days. The top of the arch usually should have the widest, most flanging stone, wedge shape. Really, the keystone is what we're talking about. When you put that keystone in place, and if it's wedged just right, it shouldn't be able to fall through. Even if you have a little earthquake or some damage, it should be pretty solid. In fact, so strong that you could build maybe a couple of stories on top of that arch. So that's why you have a lot of vaulted chambers, cisterns underneath that are arched because they're so strong. Well, that stone, the capstone, is also the keystone, is the cornerstone of Scripture. Evan Pina, Rosh Pina, in Psalm 118, I don't remember what verse now. Psalm 118, it says, the stone the builders rejected has become the chief capstone or cornerstone or keystone. It's all the same in Hebrew. So that's the Messianic connection. And when I was studying engineering, we always thought the cornerstone was way down deep in the ground, hidden down there someplace. Had no idea it was very visible up above ground. But then I also never understood that passage in Luke. I think it's Luke chapter 20, where Jesus quotes this verse. He says, if you trip over the cornerstone, you get bruised or broken. If you trip on that, you might break your leg or bruise yourself. But if that stone falls on you, you'll get crushed. And I just never understood how a cornerstone could fall on somebody until I realized it was a capstone. So there's a messianic connection for you. Very strong, very sure thing, very important. Of a mosaic tile floor that was found in a church in Jordan, and it's called Mendebal's. This is a replica that's twice the size of the original. We're on the Cardo, and the person who made this map, 6th century or so AD, Christian, he made a map that's kind of childlike. It's not, perhaps not so accurate, but a lot of things about this map have helped archaeologists. sides. You can see gates of Jerusalem from that period. Anyway, for Byzantine Christians, this street was the most important street of Jerusalem. They believed this is where Jesus was taken, down this street to here, just briefly, I don't stay here long. This whole section of town used to be outside the city walls. You'll see this better on the map we're going to view a map in about 5 minutes and 10 minutes, and you'll see how this works better. Anyway, the walls used to come like right here, and all of this would be outside of town. And this was kind of the city that Jesus knew. This section was ours. Byzantine Christians, after they built a church here, they also built a wall to protect their church. So suddenly, the place, the tomb where Jesus was perhaps buried in, crucified at, all became inside the city walls. And a lot of Christians would come here and say, well, how could this be? It's inside the city walls. Isn't that wrong? The cemetery is supposed to be outside, burial grounds, all that. And they're right. My point is, and I guess one of the few people that have recognized this interesting subject, this was their Via Dolorosa. Okay? Crusaders had no idea about where Byzantine Christians had their Via Dolorosa walk. The Crusaders started their own. They kind of made up their own little deal because the Antonia Fortress used to be about right here. They thought Jesus was tried and flagellated. And we would take it like this. So our modern Via Dolorosa, which you will see tomorrow, goes from here to here. But 500 years before Crusaders established that one, there was this one. So I'm going to give you at least 2, maybe even 3 possible avenues for Jesus to be taken out, to be crucified. I'll give you a third option.
What do you think is that?
No, I don't. But this is the oldest one of Jerusalem. So I told you yesterday there's 2 of everything. There's 2 Via Dolorosas. There's at least 2 Caiaphas' houses. There's 2 possible places for Jesus' tomb. One's over here and one's here.
Are you going to show us the one that you're thinking?
I'm going to show you both. Hezekiah's period. Hezekiah's period is First Temple period Jerusalem, 720s BC, right? And there's a section of wall that we found few pieces and parts of it here and there. It eventually makes its way back up to Jaffa Gates, and it makes its way from here down to the temple. Now, if you look over there at that map, this is the first of a series of maps we're going to look at that is more accurate. First of all, you have a dark black line how the city walls are shaped today. Are you with me? Mm-hmm. Temple Mount, you can see that at the top there. City of David sticking out like a thumb. Can you all see that? All right. City of David, underneath it is Hezekiah's tunnel. See that blue line? Underneath City of David, there's a blue line. We're going to walk that blue line this afternoon. That's a water shaft that Hezekiah dug. And Hezekiah's walls were basically including all the pink sort of area, all the red dotted lines. That's from Hezekiah's time. We're at a place, there's a yellow arrow, you are here, transversal valley, and there's a dark red piece of wall lit up there for you, highlighted rather. That's where you are now, okay? So that's Jerusalem from First Temple period. That's the Jerusalem that the Babylonians destroyed. All that red dotted line area got destroyed.
In the box seat.
Hope you'll keep up your drinking today because it's still pretty warm here in Jerusalem. Not the what was it yesterday at the Dead Sea? About 40 Celsius. 106, 105, something like that. Today it's only 30 here, so not quite 90. 90, but that's pretty warm. This is the ruin of the Rambam synagogue, Beit Knesset. It's destroyed in the fighting in 1948, fighting for Jerusalem. Who would control Jerusalem? And the Jewish community lost a lot of holdings, and this is one of the places they lost. You can even see bullet holes and things in the plaster up there from now. This synagogue was originally built in the 13th century AD. It was a long, interesting story about it, but there was a famous rabbi who came from Spain just before the Inquisition, before the Jews were kicked out of Spain, 1492. There was this rabbi that came through northern Africa. He lived in Egypt for a while, and then he came up here and visited Jerusalem. He found a few Jews living here, but they didn't have a good synagogue, so he helped build them a nice synagogue. He had money and he had connections. That synagogue, basically, it's rebuilt once, but it lasts until 1948. This is the ruin of it. And there's Ramban. I tell you what, call it Mount Horeb Synagogue, and then you'll remember it. Because that's also its second name. Hurva is Horeb, Mount Horeb. Sinai, the Sinai Synagogue, if you want. See a couple things, but hear this strange story. There was a Jewish businessman who had an argument with some of his friends, Jewish businessmen, and to prove his point, whatever that point was, we don't know, he converted to Islam. Probably, not too serious, but he did it to, kind of slap him in the face a little bit. Well, they had him completely removed. They had somebody take him out permanently. It was a pretty serious little feud. His mother, in honor of the memory of her son, built a minaret, which is normally attached to a mosque, called to prayer tower for Muslims. She built a minaret in the courtyard of the synagogue. So a Muslim minaret in the courtyard of the synagogue, it's the only Muslim minaret built by Jews that we know of in the world. And it's right in the courtyard of their most important synagogue for a long time. This was it. The present ground level, we're a couple meters below that now, and we've stepped back a couple of thousand years as well. This is the basement of a massive home that has a big, extended, wealthy, probably high priestly family. What do I mean by extended family? Well, all the sons and daughters are marrying and they're just building onto the house, and it's going and going up and out. So this is a huge home. It's probably next to Herod's mansion. This is the wealthiest house in Jerusalem from Jesus' day. This house was standing in his day. Okay, there's evidence of the Herodian influence. You see mosaic tile floors, such as you saw at Masada yesterday. I didn't show you at Masada, but there were several bathtubs in one of the palaces. So there's a couple bathtubs right there. And they think this is probably a working area of a home. Some people have suggested maybe that it's a kitchen area. It doesn't matter. Wherever you are in this home, there's always a place that you can pull aside, wash down, clean your body, and then have a ritual dunking. Here's a mikveh pool just down below us here. That I hope you all can get a good look at this particular pool, because there's something fascinating at the top steps. And I'm going to just take this nice and slow so you get a good image here. By the way, you're not supposed to take pictures down here. I'm a little slow with that announcement. But there's a guard who patrols every once in a while, and if he sees you filming, he'll probably give a shout. So, yeah.
So this is supposed to be kind of how Jesus was taken.
Back here at the Wailing Wall. Not as crowded in the daytime. I guess that's more of a tourist time. That's a Muslim mosque there. There's Mount of Olives.
This is the temple that's supposed to be rebuilt. That's still originally.
Down here is the western wall of the former temple retaining walls of Herod the Great. Where the temple once stood, today is a shrine built by Muslims, the Dome of the Rock. And we're going to see all this a little at a time. You might see more of the dome area tomorrow. But we'll pass by the western wall again a little later today. Why I paused here is to suggest that right outside the back door of the high priest's home, the high priest would walk out their back door, and at one point there was a way to walk right onto temple.
Wow.
And you can see, okay, let's take that minaret tower over there at the corner. Just below the minaret tower there's a window. Just below the window there's a protruding row of stones. There used to be a big arch, and there was a ramp over, and that was the priestly entrance. So the high priest's home is up here. They just walked out their back door, across a ramp or a bridge, and they're right in to the temple precinct, which was also the Sanhedrin met at that corner at the temple treasury building. So it's all right out their back door. So more convincing evidence that we're talking about a priestly home living, a priestly house just that you saw. Toy boat.
Back here, what we thought was the Wailing Wall, but they've changed the name Wailing to the Western Wall. It's no longer called the Wailing Wall. That changed about 30 years ago when the Jews got possession of this. It's the Wailing Wall when they did not own it. There's Tracy praying at the Western Wall, praying with Heather and some of our students. There's Jack, Gladwell. Inside there is like a library, a tunnel to the Via Dolorosa, the traditional Via Dolorosa, I believe. Tunnels through and comes out near the Muslim Dome of the Rock.
This was the main entrance to the temple in Jesus' day. The main entrance to the temple in Jesus' day was from this side. We're going to sit on those steps up there. See, there are white steps, stone steps up there. We're going to sit there. That's going to be the last thing we'll do. This is original Zion area. Well, Zion from Jesus' day. This is where you would think about it. City of David is down here, down the hill out of sight. We're going to go down into the City of David in a minute, look at some of the archaeology and things. I want you to get a good impression of what the flow was. How would a Jewish pilgrim approach the temple in Jesus' day? What was the procedure? We're going to go through all of that. And we're going to start down with the water stuff, the water image. And then some of us are standing outside. I just want you to get a little piece of wall. We're going to see some more of this down the hill. Let's cross over. Look at the garbage. Should be. What city is that? Okay.
Can't go back.
Don't go back any farther.
Oh no. This is the Kidron Valley. Oh.
You're not funny.
Kidron Valley, very steep, as you can tell. That little village over there is called Silwan, Arabic name for Siloam. Remember the pool of Siloam? That name in Arabic is Silwan. You can see that the town over there is built on a bunch of old caves. Those caves are tombs, Jewish tombs, from First Temple period times. There's a couple over there we know who were buried. There's one tomb called the tomb to Pharaoh's daughter. And I'll direct you to a red car, bright red car parked. You go slightly above the car and to the right, you should see a blue barrel, a tank on the roof. To the left of that tank, there's a slit in the rock. And there were some signs in there that indicated it was Solomon's wife that was Pharaoh's daughter. The tomb to Pharaoh's daughter is what that one's called. So, First Temple period burial ground. East of Jerusalem, this is this little hill east of Jerusalem. The rabbis call it the Hill of Messiah. And it's a wing of the Mount of Olives, Hill of Messiah. And you get the impression from Zechariah 14 that when Messiah comes, he comes from the east. His feet land on the Mount of Olives at some point, and the mountain splits. And then he goes on into temple and so forth. Well, you probably think about that more tomorrow, because you're going to be on the Mount of Olives higher points.
So is this technically the city of David?
This down here is the city of David. Kidron Valley, city of David. You wouldn't want to attack the city from this side. Right down through here is the city of David. Now this was all Jewish until 1948. And in 1948, they lost it. And this became a little Muslim town, an extension of Silwan. So this is also Silwan down here.
Oh, that is Silwan.
That's Silwan, this is Silwan. So we're going to go down through Silwan, or City of David, and look at some archaeology real quick. And then we're all going all the way to the bottom, most of us, I think, that want to go through this tunnel. I'll give you, there's a couple I know that don't want to go through the tunnel. It's kind of a tight squeeze. Claustrophobia may be a problem for some of you, and I'll show you a place that you can sit and sip on Turkish coffee while the rest of us go for a long hike through the water. Number 3 over here on the tower. That's part of the same wall that I paused at above and said this was Jesus period wall that went up to the temple. So this is the same little stretch of wall up there. It's about 150 BC. Below that wall, when they dug here, there's a bunch of terracing that goes down underneath me and all the way to the bottom. That is Jebusite period, 1000 BC. And this terracing, or supporting terracing, had probably some kind of palace at the top, which they don't know because they can't dig. That's somebody's backyard. Maybe we're talking about the fortress of Zion, the place that David makes his palace, his capital, his headquarters. Let me just read something to you. 2 Samuel chapter 5. King David and his men, after several years of living in Hebron, ruling from Hebron, they come to Jerusalem and attack the Jebusites who live there. The Jebusites said to David, "You will not get in here. Even the blind and the lame can ward you off," they thought. David cannot get in here. Nevertheless, David captured the fortress of Zion, the city of David. And on that day, David said, "Anyone who conquers the Jebusites will have to use the water shaft." I'm going to show you the water shaft that he used to conquer the Jebusites, to reach those lame and blind who are David's enemies. That is why they say the blind and the lame will not enter the palace. David then took up residence in the fortress and called it the city of David. He built up the area around it from the Milo, or we translate it as supporting terraces. Well, guess what? Looks like they may have found them. The supporting terrace is mentioned in 2 Samuel 5, probably right here. This stair step of stones that supported David's dwelling place. That he called, that it was called the Fortress of Zion.
There it is, the
In
toilet
the
seat.
shade there, it's got a nice beveled edge.
I think Steve Ducey caught somebody on tape there. What do you think, Matt?
Here we are, coming out of Hezekiah's tunnel. I hear you took a secret route. Roger took the secret route. He's jumping the wall in there, going through the...
I saw the shaft, brothers and sisters. I saw it.
I saw the shaft. Tiffany's alive! Michelle, you're wet.
I know.
Kathy, you're wet. You know, the water never got over my shorts. I don't understand. Come on, Katie. Survivor. Did you find a little toy deer? Yoni, how far is that? Do you have any idea?
527 meters long. meters, so 600 yards.
Yeah.
Wow. That's neat. This is the pool where Jesus healed the blind man in chapter 9 of John. This is at the top of Hezekiah's tunnel. Pool of Siloam.
So we just walked in water that Jesus spat in. Spat.
This street was here in Jesus' day. In fact, we know a little bit about this street from early church father texts. There's a few people, we think James the Just may have been killed right here on this corner. Maybe one of Jesus' relatives, disciples, not sure quite who he was, this guy. There's an inscription stone right here. This is the replica of the real thing. This is real, this is a replica. He used to sit up on the top corner there, and the rabbis and the priests, whoever worked the temple, would blow their shofars from that corner. And how we know is because this inscription used to be up there. From the corner, the blowing of the shofar. So this is where they would sound, their Sabbaths would begin, the holidays would begin, they would blow a horn so everybody would know when the Sabbath started and other holidays. Now the Muslims, when they arrive in the city, they know that the Jews used to have their holiday signal from right up there. So they built a mosque right on the corner and a minaret. And they sound their call to prayer 5 times a day from that corner, and then it echoes all over the city. So there are certain traditions that are borrowed by Muslims. Anyway, this was a pretty significant find for archaeologists.
Is that tradition kind of an in-your-face thing?
Have people behind me. Otherwise, we also have something interesting for archaeologists. This entire street is pretty fascinating. A Herodian road. Herod the Great built this structure with the big arch over the top, and this road, and this was a market street. There were shops. You can see some of those shop openings there. Jesus would have walked this road. He probably walked all the way around. This sort of goes right around the temple. See these big depressions here? And those piles of rocks down there? Those used to be up on the wall, or maybe part of the temple. The Romans threw them down when they were destroying the temple and the retaining walls. They didn't destroy all the retaining walls, but they destroyed the whole temple. And they threw these rocks down, and some of them broke right through the streets. You can see the destruction of these heavy stones. Some of these rocks are 10, 15 tons each, crushing and breaking the road. Also, that you're standing on this corner here, you can note that Herod's structure is like a pyramid. It's not vertically straight. These bigger stones with the borders, each layer of those stones is in step, maybe an inch or two. So Herod's entire retaining wall doesn't need cement. There's no mortar or cement from Herod's day because it's built like a pyramid. It goes in. Some of the stones, I wish that I had more time with you to show you the Hasmonean tunnel, because you walk along the wall. This, by the way, is attached to the western wall, and then beyond the western wall there's more stones like this that have been uncovered. Some of them are 500 and 600 tons each.
So this is a wall of the temple as well as that?
This is the retaining wall. The temple would have been on the other side.
Okay.
This is the retaining wall for the temple compound.
But that the western wall is a wall of the temple. That's
The
another.
western wall is part of this retaining wall system.
Okay.
Some of the super cranes that we have, modern cranes, I think the maximum capacity is like 550, 600 tons. Yet, back in Herod's day, they had the technology of moving stones that were 600 tons each, and they're not even at bedrock. They were actually putting them at midpoints on the wall. And how they were doing that was building ramps out of dirt, earth ramps, and they roll the stones up and put them in place and then take the earth away. That's how they built the pyramids in Egypt as well. Now, I didn't bring you down here to impress you with big stones. I don't think Jesus was too impressed with the big stones either. His disciples were. But I brought you down here to talk about an inscription that you can't see so well from there, but you can't see very well from here either. But there's a caper bush sticking out of the wall all by itself. There's kind of a groove cut in the wall, and then above the groove, there's a caper bush. It's like 2 stones up from the groove. You see what I'm talking about? Okay, if you see that caper bush, then 2 stones down from the caper bush is a white stone with a Hebrew inscription in it. And some of you get a little closer, maybe you can see it. I think it's one of the more important inscriptions in all of the city. And I'll read it to you. It's the first inscription.
Where is it?
I haven't always been able to bring groups down here. The last couple of years it was off limits.
It's right underneath that bush. Wrong bush. That bush. Two rows down.
Too, there's the white flat looking inscriptions on the front.
Yeah, right below the groove. Can you zoom in on it and see it?
Yeah. I can't make out. Of course, I don't read that, but I can see the inscription.
Directly below the bush is a smaller stone. And then below, the one that has a bird on it.
Yeah.
Then below that is the stone I'm talking about.
The one right below the bird.
Yeah.
To the left.
Okay, I hope you can all hear me.
Right here. I'll stand right directly.
Somebody left a purse or a little bag up there and they're calling for help. Maybe they'll call the bomb squad on it. The inscription is from Isaiah 66. Before I read it, I'll just tell you that the thought of why there's a Hebrew inscription up there during Byzantine Christian period, which is about the level of that groove. I hope you can follow what I'm talking about. Things got destroyed and there were big piles of rubble down here, so Christian Byzantine period is up above the rubble and the debris, so their level is a little higher up than where we're standing. But sometime in the Christian period there was a Jewish, there was a Christian emperor who converted to Judaism. His name was Julian the Apostate. Christian emperor who abandoned Christianity and he converted to Judaism, and for about 3 years he caused quite a stir in the Byzantine world. He invited Jews to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, to rebuild the city, and there was a lot of excitement. Jews returned, they started saving their money, and then suddenly Julian was killed or murdered or something strange about his death. And then after him, Jews were kicked out of Jerusalem again. So we think that some Jewish person, while they're getting kicked out for the second time, put an inscription in the rock from a verse in Isaiah. And here's the verse. I will extend peace to her like a river, and the wealth of nations like a flooding stream. You will nurse and be carried on her arm and dandled on her knees. As a mother comforts her child, so will I comfort you, and you'll be comforted over Jerusalem. When you see this, your heart will rejoice, and you will flourish like grass. The hand of the Lord will be made known to his servants, but his fury will be shown to his enemies. The only thing that's cut in stone up there is when you see this, your hearts will flourish, your bones will be like grass, and that's the end of it. So it's like a good Pharisee, it's like a good rabbinical quote. They just give you part of a verse, and you got to know the context. All right, so it's a little hint, or remez, it is called in Hebrew, a little remez up there. When the archaeologists were digging out this big pit here, you can see how much dirt they took out. Look at the height of that wall over there, dirt ramp. That's how deep they dug to get to this period. When they got to that inscription, they popped the cork on a champagne bottle and had a party. Because it says in the inscription, when you see this, your hearts will rejoice. So they had a little party because they also knew Isaiah 66 is messianic. When you see this, Messiah will be here. You'll have comfort in Jerusalem. You'll be able to walk around the streets. You'll be comforted. God will dandle you on his knees like a mother comforts her child, and you'll be comforted. So when they found that inscription, they also owned Jerusalem. After 1967, they felt comfort here, and they felt like Messianic age is upon them, or something like that. So I think that's a very significant find for Christians and Jews, really. I think it's significant.
Okay, where is that?
Come this way.
Closer, guys.
Is that the mosque?
I'm going to get you on the bus at 5. You'll be there by 6:30. Sir, I told you to be there. Yeah.
I know where stuff is.
Okay. We need to get to business here. Did you bring your Bibles by any chance?
Yes.
If you can open up to the book of Psalms, I'm going to ask the front row, Matt, to recite, without looking, recite Psalm 48. Because I heard you singing it earlier. Or I heard you quote it earlier. Psalm 48.
You have to help him out, I think.
Stop me, help me start.
I'll give you the first word.
Oh,
Well, that's good. That's good for first word starter.
Great is
Great.
the Lord and greatly to be praised. It depends on which translation you're in.
Let's do King James.
Oh, okay. It's the
Because-
city of our God and the mountain of his holiness, or the place of his holy mountain. Beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth. Mount Zion, the side of the north, the city of our great king.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you all hear that? Great is the Lord. See, the King James, I think, is real accurate on this verse. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of our God and the mountain of his holiness. Beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth. And then there's this great rhetorical question. Is Mount Zion on the sides of the north the city of the great king? Just ask you a question. Where's the city of the great king? Okay, Jerusalem, city of David. Where is it?
Right down there.
It's right down here. What direction is that for you compass
South.
geniuses? Yeah. South? So are you on the north side? You're on the north side of the city of the great king. So you're sitting on Zion, is what you're doing.
On the side of the north of the city.
It's the south side
That's
of the
right.
temple, but the north side of
Which side? The north side.
Pardon?
It's south side of the temple, but the north side.
It's south side of the temple, but north side of the city of the great king. I just want you to notice how Zion has moved a little bit. Did you notice how Zion moved a little bit? So when we first started talking about it, it was down there. The fortress of Zion, the place that David conquers. Later on, you've got a psalm of the sons of Korah, maybe a little after David, and they're already singing about Zion being on the north side of the city of the great king. Maybe it's the top that they're talking about. Saphon, north end, north side. Okay, just out of fascination, personal fascination, the concept of Zion has been moving for a long time. It starts down here, and then pretty soon it includes this whole ridge that you're sitting on. Some of these stones are cut right out of bedrock, that you could say technically would be Zion, right? And then it includes also the temple, which is behind you. You can't see it, but it's up there behind you a little bit. But the concept of Zion begins to move west. The next hill over, which is a much higher hill. The reason for that is because David's tomb, which used to be right down here, got destroyed, probably by the Romans. And nobody knew what happened to it after that. Maybe they thoroughly destroyed it, I don't know. But the Crusaders thought they found it on the next hill over. In fact, it's just a joke, the story of the Crusaders, and they found the tomb of David, and they open up the tomb and they hear a voice, and the voice says, this is the tomb of David. I'm quoting it to you word for word. Crusaders found a tomb and it said, this is the tomb of David. Oh, okay. So they built a building around it called the cenobium, and then a room over the tomb, which we call the upper room today. And all Christian tourists are taken there and told, this is David's tomb, upstairs is the upper room, and they all go up and sing and have services there, which is fine. I mean, it's a nice place. It's good acoustic. Great to go and sing there, but nothing historical beyond 900 years. This is original Zion. And down here, in the city of the great king, a lot of people forgot about where Zion was. And really the focus on Zion was all but lost until they excavated here and they started uncovering these steps. And along with these steps, they started finding mikvah pools, ritual bathing pools, and suddenly the pieces started to fall into place. Jews, 2,000 years ago, would come up from wherever they lived, they would come up to Jerusalem and they would start down there at the bottom, the Pool of Siloam, and they'd work their way up here, and along the way they would have a ritual bathing, they would walk up the steps, and they would recite psalms. And some of the psalms would include Psalm 121 through Psalm 134. You want to do it? Well, the demonstration is the steps are such that you can't just waltz up. You have to pay attention to your steps because they're, in one sense, it's uneven. It's a rhythm, but there's broad, even, and then there's a few narrow ones. There's space this way so that you might recite verses as you're coming up, and then there's another place where you might pause between a verse, and then you would start with more verses, on and on. Or you'd be singing them, because it was common to sing the Psalms of Ascension especially. Listen to some of these. That mosque over there? That's the call to prayer. Starts at 4 in the morning.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Does
Every
that
day.
wake you up?
Yeah, you get used to it after a while.
Could you imagine waking up to this at 4 o'clock in the morning? This is not the kind of alarm clock I need.
Wouldn't you be able to see people praying?
They might be at home, they might be in their shop. They don't have to pray exactly on the dot. They pray in and around that calling. Yeah. It's the prayer. This is the actual prayer. The call to prayer was at the beginning. They start out with some phrases, Allahu Akbar, God is great. They say a couple of things, and then they go with some type of liturgical. I don't know much of Arabic. I just a few words I can pick out.
Do they say the same prayer over and over?
There's 5. The calling to prayer is the same 5 times a day, but then there's different 5 different flavors, I guess. And then when you get to like Ramadan and different holidays, then you hear preaching as well through those. And that might go like 30 minutes. And I noticed also my brother-in-law, who's very much like Matt. My brother-in-law also knows Arabic. He studied Arabic for a couple of years, lived in Jordan for a couple of years. And he listened to the sermon once at Ramadan, and he was so hurt. He said, it's just guilt trips. They're just laying guilt trips on people. And he was really bothered him that, oh man, no wonder these people are depressed and subdued. They're just under a constant guilt trip. Anyway, I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. Imagine people thinking about this sort of imagery is they're walking up in the heat of the summer day. During the feast, it's often very hot here. So you're thinking, well, the Lord will protect you. He's your shade, is your right hand. He won't let your foot slip. And you're thinking about things like this. All right, you're coming up the temple. I want you to just get the picture. You're working on your heart. You're working on your mind. You're preparing yourself to go to meet God at temple in one sense. You with me? Okay. Maybe just one or two of the Psalms of Ascension. This is Psalm 125, verse 1. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be shaken but endures forever. If you know Mount Zion is a big rock, it's hard to shake a big rock. Remember, God is also a big rock. When we were talking yesterday a little bit of the imagery of God, he's a big rock, big football player. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people, both now and evermore. Original Jerusalem is down there. It's the smallest hill around. It's completely surrounded. If you read some of these verses about Zion on modern Mount Zion, which is very high, it's very confusing. Jerusalem's in the wrong place. It's too high. People have been bothered for years and years. Now we can sit here and read Psalms and verses about Zion, and it makes more sense. I'm going to stop the subject of Zion for a minute, but I'm going to come back to it and link it up with something we were talking about yesterday. So just hold on for a minute about Zion subjects. You still okay? You're happy? You're comfortable? If you still got your Bibles and you're still with it, second chapter of Acts. Before 1985, speculation about where this event happened involved all kinds of places around the city. After 1985, even Jewish scholars were saying, hey, your New Testament story happened right here, in the steps. Second chapter of Acts. I won't read very much, but I think you know the story, that there were people, there were Jews coming from all over, and they're coming to Jerusalem for the Feast of Pentecost, which has to do with water, and a harvest feast. And as they're coming up through town, they hear languages that they're used to speaking elsewhere. And so, being good Jews, they come in and they ask questions. What's going on? You know, they want to find out what's happening. So Peter starts explaining to them why this is happening, and part of his speech may have happened right here on the steps. That's according to Hebrew University scholarship, which I think is significant. Verse 29. Part of the speech says, "Brothers, I can tell you confidently that the patriarch David died and was buried, and his tomb is here to this day." Where was David's tomb? Stone's throw.
We got it.
Yeah.
We're tired, but we got it.
So the fact that Peter makes a reference to David's tomb as being nearby, you would assume you could see it, or it's very close. All right, close proximity, that may be a clue. Moving on further down in the text, from verse 36, you know, these people listening to Peter, they're finally convicted. They're cut to the heart. Well, what should we do? And Peter says, "Repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of your sins. And you receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. The promise is for you and your children, and for all who are far off, for all whom the Lord our God will call." With many other words he warned them and pleaded with them, "Save yourselves from this corrupt generation." Those who accepted his message were baptized, and about 3,000 were added to their number that day. Well, bless you. Like we were saying, we didn't know where this happened until recently. Part of this excavation uncovered about 50 mikveh pools, and some of them right over here. And we'll go look at those in a minute. And you've about mikvah'd out anyway. So these are the last mikveh pools we're going to see today, or maybe for several days, for a while. But until 1985, as I was telling you, nobody knew where could you baptize 3,000 people in Jerusalem. There weren't, certainly not the Gihon Spring, one at a time, 3,000 people. That's a long wait. The Pool of Siloam, it's a little crowded down there. If you had 50 mikveh pools, in fact, the archaeologists say there was probably over 200 pools here. You could line up and get yourself a mikveh and go on into temple, and that's apparently the procedure. You would come up through the city of David, you'd say your Psalms of Ascension and other things, you'd have a mikvah and go on to worship in the temple. So, 3,000 people. It turns out, also from rethinking this passage, and a couple of us were talking about this earlier, 3,000 people have a ritual immersion in the name of Jesus. And some of the Hebrew University professors looked at that and said, something's wrong with that story. Why are they doing it under Jesus' authority if he's not there? He's not physically there. Why are they agreeing to do it in his name? And they started hashing this story out a little bit and realized that, Christian scholars realized that it is abnormal to immerse a person in the name of a rabbi who's deceased, or if he's off on vacation someplace. He needs to be there present. He's the one that's encouraging you. He's reading, he's maybe preaching, and you're convicted and you're going to have a bath, and he should be there. And you're doing it in his name, by the way. You'd have a ritual immersion in the name of your teacher. We think John the Baptist had a group of followers that were doing it in his name. So his authority under God, if you will. I mean, I think, if you're confused about that, I think there's that sort of connection in a lot of Christian churches, that you're under the authority of your pastor and you do things with his permission and that sort of thing, perhaps in his name or with his seal of approval is not out of the question. So the interest here may be that 3,000 people agree to do it, and Jesus is not there, but Peter is. And maybe he's got the same authority, maybe the same spirit, all kinds of conjectures there. But there's a miracle in the fact that they do it in his name. Not that there was 3,000. Don't be confused, that's not very significant. Thousands of people a day would have had a washing going up the temple. Okay, so there is something interesting about this story. Now, close, how you're still comfortable. Let's go back to the subject of Zion for a second, and I want to turn your attention to a really, I think it's a fantastic passage in Ezekiel. Ezekiel 47. And see if this sounds familiar to you. I'm going to read, you sort of imagine this story. Ezekiel, first of all, gets a tour from an angelic type of guide that he calls the Man, which I think would be a fantastic tour. Go around Jerusalem with an angel as a guide called the Man. I think I would enjoy that. Ezekiel 47, verse 1. The Man brought me back to the entrance of the temple, and I saw water coming out from under the threshold of the temple towards the east, for the temple faced east. The water was coming down from under the south side of the temple, south of the altar. He then brought me out through the north gate, led me round the outside to the outer gate facing east, and the water was flowing from the south side. Okay? You with me so far? As the man went eastward with a measuring line in his hand, he measured off 1,000 cubits and led me through the water that was ankle deep. He measured off another 1,000 cubits and led me through the water that was knee deep. He measured off another 1,000 cubits and led me through the water that was up to the waist. He measured off another 1,000, but now it was a river that I could not cross, because the water had risen and was deep enough to swim in. A river that no one could cross. He asked me, Son of man, do you see this? Yeah, I see it. Sounds a lot like the Hezekiah Tunnel experience to me, wading through the water that flows out of this rock down here. Keep in mind, we're still dealing with rock and water imagery. God as a big rock. Water flows out, as the rabbis would see it. It moves with the people through the Sinai, this rock, right? This water flows down to the eastern region. It goes down into the Arava, where it enters the Yam HaMelach, the Salt Sea. When it empties into the sea, the water there becomes fresh. Swarms of living creatures will live wherever the river flows. There will be large numbers of fish because this water flows there and makes the salt water fresh. So wherever the river flows, everything will live. Fishermen will stand along the shore from En-Gedi to Eneglaim. We talked about this yesterday at En-Gedi. There will be places for spreading nets. The fish will be of many kinds, like the fish of the great sea. You can keep on reading on your own. But this water flows out of Jerusalem down to the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea comes to life with fish and everything. It's kind of a fascinating thought. There are a number of Jewish teachers, writers, say 1st, 2nd century BC, that tap into this imagery. One of them, his name is Ecclesiasticus, or Ben Sira. He wrote one of the apocryphal books that's preserved in the Catholic Bible. And he talks about his own teaching being tapped into the Torah, tapped into Zion, tapped into this water flowing out. And he says it himself, like it's the Gihon that flows out, the river that flows out, my teaching flows out. He said, I hope it flows to you. And he was writing to a group of Jews in Egypt. I hope my river of teaching flows to you. And I just want to suggest that maybe figuratively, God's teaching, God's Torah, flows out of Zion, out of this rock, and wherever God's teaching flows, it should bring healing and life and fruit, and even the deadest of people should come to life. The deadest of dead, like the Dead Sea or Salt Sea, should come to life. Right? This is, to me, it's fascinating imagery. Now, if you're still with me, here's where I think it gets really intense. Flip over to something like Isaiah chapter 2. This is also repeated in Micah chapter 4, almost word for word. Now I'm just going to read a little bit here. Isaiah 2 from verse 2. This is probably one of the more exciting passages that I could think of to share here. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as chief among the mountains. It will be raised above the hills, and all Goyim will stream to it. Remember we were doing a study on Goyim verses, Gentile verses? This is another one on your list. Nations will stream to the mountain of the Lord in the last days. All right? Sound familiar? I think of it every time I have a tour group here. Streaming up to Jerusalem. Many peoples will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths." The law will go out from Zion, or in other words, in Hebrew, the Torah will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Thinking about this just a little bit, who's coming up to Jerusalem in the latter times to be taught by God? There's a bunch of Gentiles here coming up to Jerusalem to be taught. And then what do? The Torah will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Who takes the Torah out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem in the latter days? There's Goyim involved in this business. I mean, Isaiah in other places talks about the light going to Gentiles, and you would imagine this is from the Hebraic side, but there's an end-time thing also where Gentiles are involved with coming up, being taught, going out. Getting into the roots, getting into your heritage, the Judaic heritage, taking it out from Zion. I always thought this was the responsibility of the Jewish community to take it out. Now I realize Gentiles are right in there. So hang on to that thought. We've got one or two more verses for you. Let me give you one from Zechariah. Zechariah chapter 8. This one I think is even more profound in one sense. Zechariah 8, verse 23. This is what the Lord the Almighty says. In those days, in fact you should read the verses preceding this, because it talks about a returning, a building up of the land. The whole chapter talks about blessings to Jerusalem, restoring Zion, dwelling in Jerusalem, Jerusalem being called the city of truth, and the mountain of the Lord, and so forth. By the way, if you go back and look at some of the Psalms of Ascension, you realize that there's several places where God says, I've desired this as a dwelling place. Here will I sit enthroned forever. Zion, I will bless you from Zion. God desires to dwell here, so you get the idea that Gentiles are coming up here for a reason. Verse 23, this is what the Lord Almighty says. In those days, 10 men from all languages and nations will take firm hold of one Jew by the hem of his robe. What's the hem of his robe? So, what do the knots and the tassels represent? Teaching, Torah precepts. Let us go with you because we've heard that God is with you. Gentiles coming up and taking hold of the tassels of a Jew and saying, we've heard God is with you. And not far beyond that is Hebron. Well, there there's some pretty good springs in Hebron. We found the aqueduct in several places along the ridge over there. And then the aqueduct comes through the Jewish quarter, through the temple, and gates down
These are the
along
gates of the temple.
tunnel, a colonnade, and then up some steps, and you'd be on temple outer courts, which was also referred to as the court of the Gentiles.
We are looking off the Mount of Olives. This is what the wilderness is that Jesus went to be tempted. 40 days and 40 nights. This is the wilderness. We're facing east. This is the Mount of Olives. Jerusalem is behind us. Smells good down here.
It's very difficult to find, so we're not going to spend our precious time finding the flag with the English version. But what we're going to do, we have a couple of toilets here.
This is where Constantine's mother said that Jesus came into this cave and taught his disciples. Hey guys, there's some disciples right there that were left here in the burial ground. But archaeology found it was a burial ground.
They looked like they've been left.
That's right.
All right, Jan.
Actually facing the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, that will affect our climate very much. Okay, so that's west. So what we can see in the west, what we can see in front of us is the Dome of the Rock. Okay, the golden dome structure. This is the first mosque, or one of the first mosques in the world, and this is the Dome of the Rock. Now, we are not interested in mosques, but we're interested in our Jewish heritage. And if we are so, this is what we're looking for. We're looking to the temple. Folks, this is the Temple Mountain. And it comes from the corner on our left, stretches all the way to the north until the road on the right. Can you see a building, the first building on the right? This is the Temple Mount, the mountain. It is 35.5 acres. And the length of it is about 500 meters, half a kilometer. Okay, now why it is important for us, folks? Because again, many things changed in this country. Many things. Because people are constantly living here. They're living, then they're building something. They destroy something, they build something. They destroy something, they build something. Okay? But we all agree all the archaeologists, all the specialists, all the scholars will agree that will be the Temple Mount. This is the place where the temple stood. The middle,
This is the Jewish cemetery.
the Golden Gate, on the Golden Gate. But also, the Muslims
Buried
not
outside
only
the city,
see
they also knew
the
Messiah would
Golden
come
Gate,
from this
they
way,
also
so
raised
buried here for a
in
reason.
front of us. This is the whole area in front of the bone boxes.
Bone boxes. Second Temple Burial Complex.
Now, I want you to see it, and I promise, folks, in 5 minutes, we'll heave the loose. 5 minutes. We'll see the bathrooms. 5 minutes.
Oh,
Okay? But before we do that, let me explain you all about those tombs and those bone boxes. Okay, but I need to have your attention so you can look at the book. Okay, now, if you look at this picture, what you can visualize is the burial tradition of the Jewish people. Now, someone said that is this a cremation box? The Semitic people never cremated their dead. Never. And if we have a cremation, so we can make sure this is not Jews or this is not Semitic people. For instance, Phoenicians, they cremated, but they're not Semitic. Okay, now, so what we will do, if someone dies, now we have, first of all, you have to visualize the tomb. It's a family tomb, just like we saw a moment ago. It's for family, 7, 8, 10 members. Why? Because why? How about having a war? Or a disaster, earthquake, I don't know, flood, plague. And some members of the family died, so we have to have a place for few members of the family. Okay? Say father dies, we will wrap him and we will anoint him. Why would we anoint him? Why would we do that?
Because it's going to smell.
Absolutely correct. To avoid smell. At the same day, we're going to put him into the burial chamber. Why is the same day? Same reason. It's very hot outside. So you can visualize this. The body will be put in a shelf in a burial cave. All right? For 11 months. For 11 months. And after the 11th month, we will come in. We'll still smell a little bit. There is no way. We have to come back in and collect the bones. We will collect the bones and we will put them into the bone box. We call this bone box an ossuary. Ossuary. And we can tell you, you probably saw they all approximately the same size. How long they are? As long as the femur. Okay, because femur is the longest bone in my body. Now, according to our burial site, we can draw a very important conclusion. How tall were the Jewish people? How tall Jesus was, folks? He was short. 5'1". That was probably his height, shorter than I am. Why all the Semitic people are short, 5'1". Now, more than this, remember we all can visualize Jesus, a tall guy, blondie hair, blue eyes, really kind of Gentile, with blue and heel fall. Wrong.
Golden hair.
What was his occupation?
craftsman.
A craftsman or a mason. Okay, teflon would be mason. We build our houses from stone. No wooden houses in this country. Not at all. Never. Okay, so he was a very strong man. Very strong, short, curly hair, dark eyes. This is Jesus. And we have those kinds of boxes and also big boxes. And big boxes are called sarcophagus. This is sarcophagus. Sarcophagus will be for rich people, not for people like me. For rich people, because why? Because they take a lot of space. They take a lot of space, and we will never collect bones from sarcophagus. We'll put the body, put the top. That's it, forever. Okay.
To the hallway alone. Okay. Here we go. That is about one of the scariest pictures I've ever seen in my life.
Disciples and Jesus were lodging here. Remember, there was no place in the hotel in Jerusalem for the pilgrims. At his last visit, his last coming for the Passover time. So Jesus probably knew the owner of this place, of this grotto, of this cave, and he and his disciples were lodging here in those last days. And Jesus was probably betrayed here by his student Judas, by his disciple Judas. All right. So what we have here is a very interesting place. Now you may stay. Let's just take a few minutes. We have a very interesting place. We are on Mount of Olives. So if we are on Mount of Olives, we have an olive grove here, an olive garden. Okay? Now alongside with the garden, we have a production of the olive oil. What do you need for the production of the olive oil? You need a press. You need a press. Very well. So this is the underground olive oil press. It's not very common, it's quite rare, but we do know those underground olive press in Israel. We met them in Tel Moresha, in Heliotropolis. We do know that they existed. It's underground olive press. Now, when is the holiday of Passover? Which month? Usually.
What's the question?
Passover holiday, which month? April. Very well. And when do we collect olives?
March
No.
and April. March?
No. No, later. In August. In August. Harvest. So at the time when Jesus is here, this is not in use. Folks, it's not in use. And that's why all those beans and all those things for making olive oil are somewhere in the corner. It's a totally dry cave. And that's why this is probably the authentic location for the betrayal of Jesus. I mean, we cannot say 100%, but we can say 99%.
I'm going through a church that's been built at Gethsemane. This is the first part is about 150 years old. The era of the Franciscans built that, and this is Crusader era. And then we'll go through Byzantine era. It's really Gothic looking. That's the eastern gate. When Jesus returns, he will land on this mountain. According to Zechariah, the mountain will split. And Jesus will enter his holy city through this gate, which has been bricked up to try to keep a prince out, that Jesus would be able to go through. See a bar mitzvah happening out here. This is Thursday, the day the bar mitzvahs are held out here at the western wall. Women sit outside the wall and they throw candy at the young man as he reads from the Torah, age 12.
From what I understand, he was saying,
Put the gold on there?
put the gold on at his own expense, like $10 million. You're holy too.
This is the inside of the eastern gate, the gate that Christ will come back through at the end times.
Okay, after this, there was a Jewish festival, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Remember? Jesus was a pious Jew. Now, in Jerusalem, next to the sheep pool, there is a
from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to
Church of the Holy Sepulchre, Church of the Resurrection, that's supposedly Golgotha, place of the skull underneath the cross. Probably not though. This is supposedly the tomb that Jesus was buried in by Catholic tradition. Jesus on this side and Joseph and them would be on this side. It's a beautiful church. It's kind of Gothic where there's 6 different churches moving. This is the Damascus gate from the time of Paul. This is the gate that Paul walked out of on his way to Damascus when he was blinded and Christ met him.
So gather around, if you please, there. That's it. So we have to converge on the next lot. If you come join the party here, Sydney, having side in the next group. I want to give you
This is the garden tomb. They believe may have been Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. they placed Jesus in. We're not sure. Here we are inside the tomb. This side over here would be the place they say that Jesus would have been laid. They see the extra piece cut out to make it larger. Obviously Jesus was larger than Joseph of Arimathea. They say this bench here could have been the place where the angel was seated. Well, this is going to conclude our trip in Jerusalem, in Israel, in 1998. It is 10:15 at night here, and at 3 a.m. we are supposed to be on an airplane heading back to the States. This has been a life-changing trip for me, as well as for the students that were able to come over with us. And now we are all congregated here in different areas of the Christ Church located in Old Jerusalem, spending some time in prayer, spending some time just fellowshipping, but realizing that God has brought us over here for a reason. And I encourage anyone who can to make a trip over here, not just for the traditional tourist sites, but for time for you to spend alone, spend in thought and spend in prayer, thinking about the past, but more importantly, thinking about the future and what lies ahead as Christ comes back for his church.